So if we're talking about multifunctional spaces, I'm thinking in terms of something's usefulness, the purpose of something, or the function that a space might hold in your mind. If I think about spaces in my own home, I've come to understand that a space doesn't need to be categorized as one thing based on the fact that we will move into a home and there's a kitchen, a living room, dining room, all of these spaces that are labeled as a certain thing. And then either they never get used or we actually use them for different things. So the dining room ends up being used as an office, ends up being used as a yoga place or whatever, because I feel like either we're forced to do that because we don't have enough space for the things we want to do, or we think creatively about those spaces and we just use them because that's what we feel like doing in the spaces. We tend to think of spaces as one thing. It's good for this thing, it's good for eating in, it's good for sleeping in, it's good for officing or like doing office work in. Instead, I think that it should be a mind shift into thinking about just space as something you can use for anything. It's just a space. Instead of thinking it as good for something, you're just thinking of it as a good space in general that you can just use. And I think that there is a reason why we need to make this shift from thinking of things as certain things. And there's lots of reasons why we should have a shift in mindset about this. Number one, we're running out of space on the planet. So we can't all just have a million rooms for a million things, especially if they're not being used ever. It doesn't even make sense to me.
Not running out of room.
We're not running out of room on the planet? We are actually running out of room on the
You're
planet.
not actually running out of room. Again, if you are using things with their, as they should be, and I mean that in the flow of how you're naturally supposed to operate, it's not about there being not enough space. It's about you not using it effectively, efficiently.
I think when we categorize things as a certain thing that's useful for a certain thing, that we limit ourselves in terms of how we would just function in general. And so I think that in order to live your most effective life in kind of going with the flow of things, that you should be able to just use the spaces that you have for whatever works for you in that moment. And if we're talking in terms of, even just in terms of fitness, which is something that we talk about a lot on this channel, if you don't have a space that you've labeled as something you would do exercise in, then maybe you would never do any exercise or any kind of movement in those spaces. You have a living room that's set up to look really nice, and heaven forbid you should do some kind of laying on the floor in that room, or doing some kind of rolling, or doing some kind of weights, or doing some kind of push-ups, or doing some kind of leg kicks, or doing anything that's movement oriented in a room that you in your mind don't conceive of as a place that you would move. And it sounds simple in that you say, oh, I don't think that way. It's just a living room, it's just a kitchen, or it's just whatever. But I think it's in those little details of how you think about things that you either allow yourself to operate in the flow state or don't allow yourself to operate in the flow state. It doesn't allow for creative thinking because you've already labeled it as a certain thing. And so it just wouldn't occur to you to do something in that space outside of what you've already categorized it for. And I think that that is very limiting. It doesn't allow for us to live in our most natural way, I think. And to include in our lives the things that are actually the most important, i.e. movement, consistent movement throughout the day. It doesn't allow for you to be creative, maybe to, paint or draw or write or dance or do anything like that, because you haven't got a space to do it in. If you don't have a space to do it in, there's no way you're even going to set it up to do those things. I think that, if we've learned anything from building and living the way that we do in this Western society, I can't speak for, other cultures and countries, although I'm sure they do it too. But here in Canada and the United States, we tend to build, if we have the money, we're going to build these spaces that just seem to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and the rooms get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then we're living in these spaces because it shows that we are successful, or we have money, or we think we need to have that. And then we end up not even living in most of it. And to me, it's definitely a waste of space. We're not living in the most efficient way that we could. We have to go from this room to that room, and there's things over here, and it would just be much easier if, things were maybe consolidated into one place. It's an arrogant way to think that we can just have all those things when we're, demolishing the forest behind us. If you look at my house, is a perfect example of that. I'm living in this beautiful house. Why do we live here? We live here because my son moved down the street and I wanted to be close to him. Just so happened that the houses are really nice in this neighborhood. We have the money, we can afford to buy them, so we buy them. And then I look around myself, and they're building behind me, and they just demolished the forest that's behind there, which they've done to build my house too. And, don't even think about the animals or anything that might be living there. It's just torn down so that we can build a giant house that I live in. And I never go in the basement. I don't use half the rooms in it. And most of the rooms are even too big for me I don't need that much space. I think we're getting better at this. We are thinking in terms of tiny homes and stuff like that. And I think that is amazing that we are starting to think in those ways, that we don't need this much space. We're wasting materials. We're wasting land. We're displacing nature in ways that we don't need to do that. Why? Because we think more is better, bigger is better. It makes us look more important, and for whatever reasons we have, but it doesn't end up making us happier, that's for sure. And it also is detrimental, I think, in that it separates us from each other more. We don't have to learn to communicate better. We don't have to learn to live together better. And, and if you watched my video on multi-generational living, which I've learned that is very important, that we need to have that. And I think that is a definite factor in a lot of family problems, is that we don't have enough support from our families and the communities around us. We've alienated ourselves, we've separated ourselves out, and we've just made ourselves these floating islands that are dysfunctional. It's hard to fix, and it's a huge topic that's definitely more than one video to talk about. But I think in terms of just multifunctional spaces, I think moving forward, we can do a few things. So number one, where we live in this nice house, I'm learning that I don't use the spaces for most of the time for what they're necessarily labeled for. And you'll see that when you look around our house. Yes, we cook in the kitchen because that's where that's where the food is kept and stuff like that, and where we have a stove. But most of the other spaces function as so many different things. And I think we all do that to a certain extent. But I think that a lot of people, in having spaces that are called certain things, just because they're called those things, it might prevent them from doing things in those spaces that they would otherwise feel called to do, or just feel like doing. a lot of times we try to validate our lives through the external world, our spaces in our homes being, a big part of that. What does your house look like? How is it decorated? Just what does it look like mainly? And again, labeling it as certain things, it has to stay a certain way. I have this thing about throw pillows. They drive me insane. When we bought the house, it came with some throw pillows in it because we got some of the furniture. And so we just have those throw pillows. And not that you never use a throw pillow, but you see these shows where they have all these throw pillows, and it's just like they're all put perfectly on the couch, and they're color coordinated and all that. And not to say that certain colors can't make you feel a certain way and all that stuff, but it just seems that it's made in this way that you can't sit in it. You can't live in that space. You can't touch anything. You can't make a mess in it. You can't do anything. And that to me is the opposite of what a home should be. Not that your house should be filthy dirty or like a complete disaster all the time or anything like that. You should be able to live in it, and you should be able to feel free to do the things that you feel, most called to do in your home. In any part of the home, you should just be able to do those things and not think, oh my gosh, I can't, it'll just get, I couldn't do that in there because that's not what that room is meant to do, or I don't want to wreck the look of it. Even arguing with my husband about, putting pictures on the walls. This is a huge pet peeve that I have. We have pictures of our family that I want to put on the wall, and he doesn't want to put any holes in the walls. Why? Because he doesn't want to disturb the walls. And to me, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And I mean, not everybody's like that, and that's just, he has worked very hard to make all this money to buy this beautiful home, and now it's like we can't touch it. We can't do anything in it. And I say to him, you need to think about what you're saying, because we're trying to put up images of our family that we can look at and enjoy. To me, that just is something you would do, or putting art up on the walls, and that's just one little example. And not, I'm not saying, I think that he, as we all have sort of bought into this, what is our home representing of us? And if it looked messy, or if it had, a weight rack in the living room, and we don't want anybody to come over, because then what would they think about that? It seems like we either don't live freely, or we feel bad about it, or what somebody might think about it after it, neither of which should be the case.
Maybe you don't want to weight rack in your living room, but that's the whole point of developing spaces that, with the intention that they're multifunctional.
Yes. Yeah.
Rather than trying to fit it into these traditional homes.
Right. And so this is what, having lived in this home and the other homes that we've lived in, this is what I've learned, in that I use the spaces for so many different things. And being that fitness is very important to us, and movement, and being creative and making music and doing art and all of those things just seems to be a natural things that people do to feel good. That the home that I live in, I want it to be able to accommodate those things. So living in a conventional home where we have the nice living room and the nice family room and the nice dining table and all of those things, it's very nice. It's very nice. But it doesn't allow us to live in the way that we feel is the most natural for us. And so now we have all these nice spaces, and we've piled things on top of those nice things in order that we can use them. So we have the weight bench in the dining room. We have a sandbag in the family room. We have a studio up in our one bedroom where we have lights. We have it in this living room. We're doing things that are just like not conventional in these spaces. And I think it just would make way more sense to build spaces that accommodate the things that people naturally do, And if we do them as a family, I know other people do them as a family. And if they're not doing them as a family, then they probably have been blocked from doing those things because they don't want to disturb what their home is supposed to be. That's kind of how I think about it. There's been so many times in the creative process with our family that I have said to myself, if you have said to my son, how many times? If you had any other mother, you would never be able to do the things you're doing because you'd be making a disaster of her house. And they don't want that. Nobody wants that. They don't want to deal with the mess. They don't want to deal with, lights and paintings and all of this stuff all over the place, and music stuff set up all over the place. They just wouldn't want that. And so if they wouldn't want it, then you're not doing it. That's how I think about it. And so lucky for him, he has me at least to say, you know what? I value being creative, and I value living in a way that just makes us feel good. It makes more sense to do those things than to worry about how your space looks or what people might think about your space or anything like that. I really want to make an attempt to design something that really accommodates all of the ways in which we live creatively, actively, like all of those things. I think it's very true that now we think about the aesthetic of a place, of a home, and then we try to fit in the health of ourselves, or like our true nature, in being active and being creative and doing all those things after we've already built it a certain way. I think that it has to be the reverse. I think we need to build things to accommodate our true nature as human beings. First, being active, being creative, being able to have different people living in those spaces. All of those things, we need to build it in a way that is just inherent in the space. And then because you build it that way, and because you're living in a way that you're happy and everything is flowing for you and the people around you, it will just naturally, be lovely to you. You won't have to try to make it look nice. You won't need to have to put the throw pillows on the couch in a certain way, because that's unnecessary. You shouldn't have to fit into your home. Your home is a place where you already fit in. And it should be comfortable for you. It should allow you to do all the things that you love doing and to freely be yourself in that space. Our physical spaces, in my mind, are a reflection of our mental state. And I think if you just look at the spaces that we've created, the boxes that we've put ourselves in, the limitations that we've created for ourselves, that tells me that we think in those ways as well. We like to identify ourselves as certain things. We like to put ourselves in certain categories. I think it gives us a sense of control. Yeah, we need to know what certain things are. I think it makes us feel like we have some sort of sense of control over our environment and ourselves and all of that stuff. And that's okay, but at the same time, I feel like it's limiting when we do that, because now, if you say that you are a certain thing, then you act a certain way. Similarly, if you say your home, this room is a certain thing, then in your head, you're only going to do those things in that room. If you think something is a certain way, whether it's you or the rooms in your house, you actually prevent yourself from being anything else. You prevent yourself from being anything else. You prevent those rooms from being anything else. You prevent any sort of growth, creative steps, or anything like that. You already have limited yourself to that thing that you said that you were, or that thing is already. If you think of yourself in terms of a certain thing, like say I am a writer, that's what I am, that's all that I am, then how can I think of myself in terms of anything else? Even though I might be interested in other things, or maybe want to do something else at some point, if I've only defined myself as that one thing, and we do that all the time, and the world outside sees me as that, then how can I be anything else? How can I even try anything else? I just think it's not that people wouldn't try other things or try to do other things, but I just think you've already just limited yourself to that one thing. And if, as humans, and we do this, we take the easiest route to things, and we won't, we are inclined to not stretch too far outside of boundaries that we've created for ourselves. If we tend to do that, and we actually do that, then if we put a stop on something, you are a librarian, you are a writer. This is your living room. This is, the dining room. What is this thing? As soon as you've defined things in specified categories, whether it's yourself or the place that you live or anything in the world, then it's very hard to step outside of that boundary. It's very hard to step outside of that. Yeah, the flow of life and you being whatever you are in that moment or in the future or anything like that is just cut, stopped. I think in terms of your spaces, I think just allowing the spaces to be what they are whenever they need to be that thing. And to allow that to happen, give up this the illusion of control that we have of those spaces, and just let the natural order flow through those spaces. I think people think that if they give up the sense of control that they have in their homes, that things will be thrown into utter chaos. Just like my husband would be like, oh my God, there are things that we're going to put on the walls. What's going to happen to the walls? And I'm like, you're going to have art on the walls. You're going to have paintings on the walls. It will be beautiful. The walls will be just a reflection of the things that are important in your life, and it will feel like the space that you want to be in. Yeah, I think it will just reflect the natural order of your life, the things that are important to you, and you'll just feel better living in that space overall, rather than trying to live in this forced, set. I like the term, you are your living room. Your living room isn't the couch. Your living room isn't the carpet that you have, or those matching throw pillows in your living room. Your living room is you living naturally in that space, doing whatever it is that you feel like doing. So if you're doing yoga in there, if you're painting a picture in there, if you're playing music in there, if you're building a giant fort out of cushions in there, if you're doing a giant puzzle on the floor and it stays there for months, that's your living room. That's what makes you feel good. Your living room is wherever you are and wherever you're living your best life. If you think of your space beyond that which you define it, first of all, you don't want to define it as anything for yourself, because you don't want to limit the things that you're going to do in that space, number one. But you also don't want to limit it in terms of whatever else might happen to live in that space. How does the dog function in that space? How does your partner function in that space? How do the mice, if there's a mouse living in the wall, how does he define that space, or what is he doing in that space? It's just a space. That's the whole point. It's a space in which we all need to live and function in the best way that we can. And I think just allowing it to be whatever it is going to be, not that you necessarily want to have mice running around through your walls, but
how does all of life use the space?
Well, I think if you're talking about how does life use the space, there's your house and who's going to be in your house, but you also have to think about who's living in the rest of the world, who's living in that forest, that was over here that you ripped down. I think that is important, very important to keep in mind, that we are living on this planet with life as a whole, and that we need to be considerate of all of those things when we're building our spaces. And we have to take that into consideration. How does life use the space? We can't just look at it from our own perspective anymore. We've done that, for however long, and that's not working for us. It's not working for us as families. It's not working for us as the environment. It's not working for us, period. It's about being respectful to everyone and everything on the planet, where we build, how we live, all of those things. And I think if you think of spaces in terms of multifunctional use, that you're just that much closer to respecting the other things, that the other beings and creatures and people that we're living with here on this planet. If you think about it from this expanded perspective, then all spaces are multifunctional. We can use the space, any space, for anything pretty much. And we're just now trying to bring that more into our homes. You know, the spaces that we live in, the homes that we live in, the land that we live on is already being used as spaces for everything else on the planet. So it's already a multifunctional space. I think that humans need to get more on board with that and try to live in ways that I think maybe everything except humans already do. Just respecting the connected nature of life, not trying to, push everything else out.